Okay, so here's our details, and let's continue. If you do have any questions, as Shark said, please take them down during the webinar, and I'll get to them at the end. They don't necessarily need to be purely about debts during the lockdown. I am an attorney, so I can answer your legal questions even if they are not directly relevant to this webinar. And then time permitting, obviously, I'll be able to get to all of them. All right, so what are the effects of this lockdown on business? So obviously, most businesses, only those ones that are classed as essential, are allowed to stay open. So most businesses have had to shut down their main operations. Those that have the capabilities to operate remotely are obviously able to do so, but without obviously meeting people face to face. So it all has to be done by computers. Thankfully, we live in a day and age where that is possible, but obviously not for all businesses. Some businesses just can't do it. So because of the uncertainty that this has created, there's obviously a downturn in business. People aren't contacting businesses like they used to. For a lot of reasons. People also don't really know whether they're going to have jobs to go back to when the lockdown is lifted, and they obviously don't want to part with their money as quickly as they would have in the past. So obviously, some businesses are not paying their staff during the lockdown period. So those lower incomes obviously mean that there's less available money to buy goods that people might normally buy when they're not facing difficult times. So obviously less people will give their business to those smaller entities. Everyone's saving their money for those supermarkets and groceries. That being said, it's still a huge effect on people because they have the same expenses that they normally have. They've still got to pay their insurance. They've still got to pay their bond. People still got to pay their rent. And yet they're not earning the same. They might not even be earning anything. So you've got a lot of people that are trying to find ways to avoid liability to pay things because obviously they want to come out of this thing alive. So obviously this all results in people choosing to spend their money far more carefully, and they obviously then perhaps cut out certain expenses completely. Those luxury goods obviously aren't going to be sold, but obviously nobody's allowed to sell anything other than basic necessities in any event. And then obviously there are the effects of this on the economy, the wider economy, not just businesses. Consumers have decreased spending power. People are facing retrenchments. A lot of businesses are having to consider retrenchments already at this juncture, which is extremely worrying because we don't know if this lockdown might get extended a second time. It may be a case that we only come out of this in June or July, maybe. You never know. So there's always the consideration that people have to be retrenched to save businesses. Then there's obviously those businesses that just cannot survive the lockdown that will have to then go into liquidation. And obviously businesses closing down affects the economy hugely. Big negative impact on the economy. And those consumers that have access to credit or debt facilities and are not earning income will obviously be incurring significant debts to try and live through the lockdown, just to buy their groceries on a monthly basis if they're not getting paid. It's quite an expensive thing to do. Consumers incurring debt now means that they're going to be paying that debt off for quite a significant period after the lockdown, depending on how long the lockdown is. And that'll affect their expenditure after the lockdown because they'll have less money available afterwards to spend on other products. Obviously the loss of jobs is huge, and people with when the unemployment rate is high, people have less money to spend, and that affects jobs, businesses at the end of the lockdown as well. It's not just people losing their jobs now, it's when people lose their jobs after the lockdown is lifted. Those people have no money to contribute towards the economy, and that obviously over time further decreases the spending power of people that contribute to the economy normally, and that obviously has a negative growth outcome, and it could even push us into recession. We don't really know. So it's an altogether poor outlook for all countries, but obviously us in in a country with quite a fragile economy, to say the least. It is a very poor outlook. So what are your obligations then in terms of payment of suppliers? So debts that are incurred before the lockdown are still due and payable, and those incurred during the lockdown are also due and payable. The situation of the lockdown doesn't exonerate you from liability altogether. Suppliers and creditors still need to be paid money which is due. The law itself doesn't change, the money is still owed. This is even more so the case where you've bought goods on credit, for instance, and you've received the goods in question. So if you've got a supplier and you purchase on credit from them and pay it off on a monthly basis, or you purchase every now and then you purchase on credit and you generally pay at a certain time, that money is still due. And if you've got the goods, it is important that those suppliers get paid. And you must remember that every supplier has their own suppliers that they need to pay. So when one person, one business in the link doesn't pay, it does create a huge ripple effect on all businesses throughout the economy. There are certain contractual clauses, if you do have contracts in place, that can provide some relief. The specific clauses being referred to are referred to as force majeure clauses. Those clauses are specifically in place to deal with situations that arise like this one, where nobody actually thinks it's going to happen, but in the event that it does, that clause can protect you by, for instance, delaying performance to say, okay, if a force majeure event occurs and it's just out of your power, you can't perform, pay because of this event, which they title an act of God, then you can escape liability for that time period and then follow up on your performance once the force majeure event has ceased having an effect on you. But obviously, this is not the case for the vast majority of informal agreements that are in place. So those agreements where you sort of you buy on credit, but you haven't got a proper contract in place that you've both sat together and drafted together and signed. Those force majeure clauses aren't generally in those basic contracts, and they aren't really a part of your agreements if you've just agreed informally. But that being said, despite the poor outlook and the fact that the money is still owed, those larger corporations, especially banks, are making mechanisms available for debtors to continue to meet their obligations, both during the lockdown and thereafter, because they understand that you will have a huge problem paying your debts during the lockdown, but that the effects will be felt after the lockdown as well. You'll still have the reduced ability to pay. They are offering, banks in particular, offering things like payment holidays. Obviously, you have to find out exactly what the terms are that the bank is offering. Generally, the interest continues to run, so you have to be careful with that. So they say, you don't have to pay for 6 months, but obviously the interest continues to run for those 6 months. So you also have to just make sure that you are fully acquainted with the terms of the mechanism you're using to try and get through this difficult time. And then obviously, as with business all the time, negotiation is still an option. And creditors will likely be understanding given the circumstances. And that being said, legal action cannot be taken during the lockdown in any event. So nobody's going to be chasing you during the lockdown, and thereafter negotiation will take place. But it's best, to get the negotiation done as soon as possible. Start engaging with suppliers and creditors, letting them know that the situation is quite difficult, and trying to come to a new arrangement with regards to your payments. And we are finding all around that there seems to be a lot of understanding from everybody. We're all in the same boat. So people are generally able and willing and able to assist and negotiate where they can. Yeah. So in summary, just with the payment, everything still remains due and payable. It's not all frozen. It's still an obligation on your part, but there are mechanisms available for you to deal with the situation. And a big thing that's come up during the lockdown is payment of employees. Obviously, businesses turning turning down. Those businesses that can't operate remotely obviously won't be earning any income whatsoever. And those businesses that can operate remotely might have a significantly reduced turnover, and obviously will struggle to pay their employees. Now, the general rule is that employees get paid for the work that they do. If they're unable to work, they obviously don't get paid. If somebody decides to take a month off, you don't pay them for the full month unless they have that much leave available. That applies to this situation as well. But we must always remember that business is about more than just the letter of the law. Business is not just about following the law only. Obviously, we need to follow the law and make sure that we're in compliance with the law, but there are other considerations. The ethical and moral considerations play a very important role in situations like this. The government has called on all businesses that can afford to pay their staff to do so during the lockdown. Obviously, not every business can do that, and where the businesses have an inability or in what the government has termed distress, the government has set up relief measures to assist unpaid employees. So the business then has an obligation to apply to whatever relief fund there might be, and to see that they can get those relief measures put in place to protect their employees during this difficult time. It's important to bear in mind that if the business can afford to pay, that they may well not get funding from government. So the business needs to submit certain supporting documents to the government, and those supporting documents will then be verified, and the government will make a call as to whether the business meets the criteria to get the payments so that they can pay their employees. If the business is found not to be in distress and that they can easily afford to pay their staff, there's obviously going to be potential refusals of claims from these relief funds, because these relief funds are obviously there to provide relief for those in need. So if a business that can easily pay then applies and gets refused and still refuses to pay their employees themselves, there might be some significant unfair labor practice claims coming through after the lockdown period. Obviously, this hasn't been tested yet. It's a time where businesses and employers will be relied upon, and those that help with what they can during this difficult time will obviously be better in the long run. And there's those that don't do what they can, even if they've got some means available, are obviously going to potentially suffer negative consequences in future. We're not quite sure of what the implications will be when it gets tested, and I'm sure after the lockdown it's going to get tested to no end in the CCMA and with the Department of Labor and in the labor courts. People are going to be suing their employers, I'm sure. But where the employer just actually cannot afford to pay their employees, there's obviously there's obviously no way that they can do it. So there's not going to be any issues for those employers. So what is this temporary relief scheme? It's called the Temporary Employer-Employee Relief Scheme, or the TERS for short, the TERS. So basically the government has used the UIF to set up a fund to help those distressed employers. It's a separate fund, but making use of both funds in the UIF as well as donations from various business people and other entities throughout the country. The fund has obviously got quite a lot of quite significant means, but that being said, there are a lot of businesses in South Africa that occupy that small market, which will all need assistance. So if all the application forms are filled in correctly and the details submitted are verified, then the fund will pay the business to assist them to pay each of the employees. It might actually, all the details haven't been fully confirmed, but I think they might even pay employees directly. So the employer submits banking details of each of the employees with all the verifying information, and then the employees get paid by the UIF directly. So again, those businesses that are in distress will have access to funding for the employees. And as I said, if an employer fails to meet the criteria, i.e. if the business is not in distress but also refuse to pay, there may be consequences. But again, we're not 100% sure how our courts will view the issue with regards to employers who can pay but choose not to. It's difficult to know what the implications of those actions might be. So just to sum up exactly what we've done and what we've gone through, as we know, it's a difficult time for everybody. Both individuals and businesses will be affected, and it's not just a financial impact, of course, for everybody involved. This is a very, very tough time in every aspect of their lives, and the effects are going to be long term. It's not just going to be for the duration of the lockdown. We have no idea what the magnitude of the effects are going to be and how long they will last, but it's certain that there's going to be there are going to be repercussions after this lockdown. But that being said, there are mechanisms in place to mitigate the effects of the epidemic. Even if they are only slightly of slight assistance, they will help cushion the blow hugely. You know, the government is constantly evolving their plans based on their own discussions, as well as what the international community is doing to try and mitigate these effects. We see in the richer countries, people will barely feel the crunch during the lockdown because their governments have the means to pay them during the entirety of the lockdown. Unfortunately for us, we're not in the same privileged position. Our government does struggle to meet its obligations, and this will obviously place huge strain on the government, but they do seem to be keeping up to date with all the possibilities of how they might assist people. And it's important for you as business owners to keep abreast of all of those developments. You know, keep track of what your options are. Make sure that you follow exactly what the government is telling everybody what to do, because that's only going to help you in the long run. But most importantly, those that have suppliers and creditors, negotiations need to begin as soon as possible. You need to engage with them. This is obviously a time for everyone to be understanding and to work together. And the sooner you get it underway, the better, because, you know, if you wait until the end of the lockdown and then you say, sorry, the lockdown's been tough, there may be less sympathetic ears than you would get now. But again, a negotiation is always an option. And then obviously, in order to ensure future stability, those employers who can afford to pay their staff, even if only partially to assist them, are encouraged by the government to do so. So that's the basics of the lockdown situation. You know, as I said, the government is constantly evolving their plans, and it's always changing. So it's important for you to always keep track of what the government's doing. Make sure you keep abreast of the president's addresses to the nation, and hopefully we can all get through this thing and come out the other side. So thank you. That's it for the presentation. Please do remember to submit your questions if you have any.
All right. So then, are you ready for the first question?
Yeah, sure.
Okay, so the first one, what do we do if we are an essential business with work coming in, the plumbers, but our staff refuse to come to work? Can we apply leave? We have applied annual leave available and advance for April, June leave. Can we then implement no work, no pay?
Yes, okay. So that's actually a very relevant question, and staff members are obviously, so the position is this: a staff member is allowed to refuse to come to work during a situation like this, but if they are doing so without being forced by their employer not to come to work to prevent the spread of infection, the staff member is taking voluntary leave. In other words, you can take if they want to take paid leave, they can, for as long as they have paid leave available, and thereafter it's going to be unpaid leave, no work, no pay. The staff member is deciding not to come to work. That is the staff member's prerogative. You don't have to pay for a staff member who refuses to come to work when work is available to be done.
And then the next one, please confirm if the employee takes accrued leave, one still needs to pay them for those days, as how it would have been had they taken said leave during normal circumstances.
Yes, 100%, that's correct. So any leave that they have, if they have annual leave, let's say they've got 5 days of annual leave, if they want to take those days, they get paid just the same if they're taking them during the lockdown. Yeah, and obviously you need to give them the option. They can take paid leave or they can take unpaid leave. It's their option. They don't have to take their paid leave now.
What advice can you provide to people renting property as accommodation and cannot pay due to them not receiving salary due to the lockdown? Can
This
they
is a
be evicted
huge,
during the lockdown?
okay, this is a huge one. Huh? This is a big question that people have, and it's such a sad time for people that can't afford to pay their rent. So there's two positions. Obviously, this person has asked about residential property specifically, but I'll deal with both commercial and residential property. The position with commercial property is that the property will be dealt with in terms of its contract. If there's a force majeure clause, obviously that clause will be followed. In general, with commercial property, if it's impossible for the tenant to occupy the premises because of the lockdown, they would not be responsible for the rent. But with residential property, there's a different story. The lockdown doesn't prevent you from occupying the premises. You have use and enjoyment of the premises. Unfortunately, in that scenario, rent is still due. You have to pay your rent. You've got use of your premises, and this is a big one because this is the biggest expense in the majority of people's lives. Is the rent, is their accommodation. But the fact of the matter is that you still have use of the premises. That being said, your options during this time fall to negotiation. You need to negotiate with your landlord and come to some form of agreement, whether you can partially pay or you can say, can I pay you half and then catch it up later, or whatever the case is, you need to come to something that will work for you, and you need to engage with your landlord. You must also remember that the large majority of landlords have to pay bonds over the houses that they are leasing, and the large majority of them are not going to be or may not be able to get any sort of payment holidays. You never really know. So they do have their own expenses that they have to also cover. So it is a time for negotiation, and that is your best bet. There's no way for you to escape liability completely. But that being said, you won't be evicted during the lockdown. The courts are not open to people unless the matters are extremely urgent, and an eviction is not going to be an extremely urgent matter. So you won't be evicted during the lockdown, but after the lockdown, if you haven't negotiated something between you and your landlord, you may face problems after the lockdown.
Okay, the next one. My company is okay now with cash and we are paying the April salary, but we will be in distress in May. How do I apply for UIF funding to assist now to prevent distress or help the company in the coming months?
All right, so that's a very generous thing to do, to pay the salaries in April. It's really solid employment practice, and I'm sure your staff are grateful for that. That being said, to apply for your funding, I will have to send you the link because I don't have the link with me now, but it's on the government website. You go to the link and they tell you exactly what information you need to submit. It's very clear. So if you could submit this question after the session, just in writing to the organizers, and I will forward a link that I have to the relevant government website for you to submit the details.
Yeah, then the next one. A one-man band like me have no UIF, so will the government help me?
Okay, so yeah, that's a difficult one. So the UIF is obviously there for those that pay UIF. This is dependent on whether or not you're tax compliant. If you're tax compliant, which I assume you are, you're paying your taxes, then the government is there to assist you as a business owner. If you are taking a set salary every month or whatever the case is, your best bet is to fill out the application forms and to submit them and see whether the government will assist you with the same mechanism. There are a lot of one-man bands out there. Sole proprietorship is a huge thing in our country. So it's difficult to foresee a situation where the government wouldn't try and assist those businesses as well.
Okay, next one. I do have foreign nationals in my employment. Do they qualify for the government temporary relief fund?
Right, that's a good question. So as far as I'm aware, as long as they are employed by you, they will fall under the relief fund. So as long as you are paying UIF on their behalf and they are paying obviously from their salary their portion of the UIF, and everything else is in order, they should qualify for the same benefits.
If your tax certificate is not up to date, will UIF still pay out?
Right. So the biggest thing that the government has brought up with this is tax compliance. So if you are not compliant with all of their requirements, then there's a heavy possibility that funding might be declined. But it also depends on a case-by-case basis. If it's not up to date for a non-malicious, not intentional, unintentional purpose, unintentional reason, then obviously there should be some leeway. But if there's tax non-compliance, then there are going to be issues in obtaining relief from the fund.
Okay, the next one. Hi guys, uh, if the lockdown goes for approximately 3 to 4 months, uh, which it looks like it will, even after paying our employees all their leave pay due, which is approximately 21 days plus any sick days leave, are we still bound to pay them thereafter?
Okay, so you're not bound to pay your staff at all. You're not bound to pay them. You have to pay their leave days. Obviously, that amount is due. So whatever leave they have accrued over the course of their employment, is what they're entitled to, and you'll then have to pay them for that if they choose to take that leave during this time. But once their leave is finished, you don't have to pay them. And as I said, if you are in distress, you can apply for the funding and get whatever you can for your employees. Where you just don't have the means available, you have no obligation to pay your staff where they don't have paid leave days left.
If you are paying your staff in full during this time and they are at home, how do you deal with leave? There are some with leave due and others without leave due. Do you deduct all days from their leave so that they have negative days due?
Okay, so this has to be judged on a case by case basis. Um, the position is that the business can ask their staff to take leave during this time because they obviously can't work. Those staff that have annual leave will then be paid, and those that will not be paid. That being said, if the business has made the call to pay their staff and not ask them to take leave, then you won't deduct any leave. But this needs to be done in a way that's fair to everybody. So obviously, it's not necessarily fair for the business to absorb the entire cost of the lockdown and just pay their staff, and the staff get a free holiday. But it may be a situation where there's a compromise. The staff will take half the time as leave, and if they have paid leave, they can get paid for that half. And if they don't get paid for that half. It's really dependent on what the business can do in the circumstances. So it's not a case of if you've decided to pay your staff, then you must just take the leave away from those who have leave and pay the others despite not having leave, because that's not exactly a fair implementation of a policy. You need to make sure that all your staff are treated the same. So if you're going to pay your staff because you can, then your staff obviously need to all be paid without the leave consequences. But if you're going to ask staff to take leave, then perhaps consider paying them a portion of their salary and asking them to take leave for the rest. It's purely dependent on your own circumstances. But as I said, the position is that you can ask your staff to take leave if they can't work, and you don't have an obligation to pay them. And if you're on distress, you apply to the fund to assist your staff members. So that's the position.
How do we pay vehicle payments with no income?
Right. So vehicle payments are generally dealt with by the banks. You need to contact your bank directly and ask them what mechanisms they have available to you in order to meet your obligations during and after the lockdown. As I said, particularly the big institutions, have these mechanisms available. They're making them available to everybody. The banks understand the wider economic concerns that this lockdown is going to have, and they realize that if they force their clients to pay now, their clients won't be able to pay them later anyway, so they're going to lose all their money. So they do understand that they need to provide some breathing room to their clients, otherwise they will lose all their money. So you must contact your bank, ask them to give you an idea of what their mechanisms are, and then consider your options. Make sure that you read through all their terms and conditions, and by negotiating with the bank, you can come to some kind of arrangement. Generally speaking, the banks are offering payment holidays. Some of them, I believe, I'm not certain, but some of them may even be offering interest-free payment holidays. But I'm not certain. You have to discuss particulars with your bank specifically.
Do you have the details for us to contact regarding the relief fund for employees, please?
Okay, yes. As I said with the previous question, I will get the relevant link to the government website for the submission of all those documents, and then you can do so.
Okay, so another one just asking if you can throw your email up there again to discuss further consultation.
Yes, there you go.
Okay, if my employment force is 60-40 instead of the prescribed 70-30, will my staff still be able to apply for UIF?
So say that again, sorry?
If my employment force is 60-40 instead of the prescribed 70-30, will my staff still be able to apply for UIF?
That's a good question. I'm not fully certain of what the implications would be. It's all going to be dependent on the department's assessment of the documents that are submitted. Unfortunately, I'm not too sure about that one.
I can work, but there is not enough work coming in to pay my workers. What do I do now? How must I pay them?
Okay, so as I said, your obligation, you don't have an obligation to just pay your staff, no questions asked. Okay, those businesses that can have been asked by government to do so, but those that cannot do it, or that it would put them in a very, very difficult position in future, which would end up costing jobs, shouldn't feel compelled to do so. Those that can take leave, obviously, as I said, can take leave. Those that don't have leave will not get paid. And it's obviously dictated by the circumstances. If there's no work to be done by the other staff members, then, there's no way that the business can pay them. And as I said, you would then need to contact the relief fund and try and get some assistance for your staff members. There is a maximum, I think it's about 6,500 Rand per month that it can pay out to staff members, but at least it'll cushion the blow for those that, even if they earn more, they can at least have a cushion for the income that they'd be losing.
If you are currently under debt review, could you still get help from the government?
There shouldn't be any reason why the debt review will affect your the relief that you get from the government, because even people under debt review do have expenses that they need to cover on a monthly basis. But obviously, if you're under debt review, you should have a debt counselor. So also talk to your debt counselor about that.
Right. I've sent my papers through to UIF last week already, but I've not heard anything back. I've also completed the SMME funding, but I've also not heard anything back, not even a reference number.
Oh, gosh, okay. Look, I would submit all your documents again, and also ask for confirmation of receipt of your previous set of documents. Or at least before you submit them again, just ask for confirmation of receipt, and just use the same email and just forward it to them again and ask them if they have received it. They are obviously going to be receiving a lot of queries over the coming days, and so they might be very backlogged. I'm not certain of what the turnaround time might be, but yeah, before submitting your documents again, ask for confirmation and give it a few days, because obviously you don't want to submit double claims and have any issues with that. And if you still aren't able to come right, try and find some contact details. I'll see if I can find a contact number as well, and just ask them what you should be doing if you haven't gotten a reply, or at least how long you should be expecting to wait for a reply.
Right, the next one, if you are not able to pay your suppliers after May, should you file for bankruptcy?
Okay, so you shouldn't ever be quick to apply for liquidation. As I said, you need to negotiate with your suppliers. If you are unable to pay now, don't overstretch your budget to the point where you absolutely are going to fall into a position where you're going to have to be liquidated. It's the same as it is with the payment of employees. If the business can't afford it, in your estimation, the business can't afford it, then obviously you can't pay everybody for 1 month and they come back and there's no job at the end of the lockdown. It's better to preserve the jobs. It's better to preserve the business. So as far as possible, you need to negotiate with your suppliers to come to an arrangement that you know will work for your business. Everybody's business has different finances available, and so everybody needs to make sure that their arrangements with each of their suppliers and creditors suit their own business needs.
Okay, the next one, contracts or not, if I did not work, how can I pay? I can't eat my car or house even if I use it.
Sorry, say that one again.
It says contract or not. If I did
Yes.
not work, how can I pay? I can't eat my car or house even if I use it.
Yes, 100%. Okay, as I said, it's all about the negotiation. People are being very understanding with this. So if you haven't been able to work and you're not getting money, you've got to discuss specifically with each of your creditors. Your car and your house should be your easier options, because the banks are very open to negotiation. Well, they seem to be, at least, and they do understand the far-reaching consequences of not having work. And they understand that it's better to give their clients leeway than it is to crush them under debt. So contact each of your creditors and let them know, listen, it's not going to happen during the lockdown, unfortunately. What arrangements can be put in place to ensure that I can meet my obligations once the lockdown ends? And those, again, the same goes for paying salaries. Yeah, I don't think I have to repeat that one again.
If you are registered as a sole proprietor and cannot register as an essential business on the IOPSA website because you are not a company but you can render essential services, are you then simply not permitted to work?
If you are performing an essential service, you should always be able to register as an essential service and get confirmation from the IOPSA. If there is an issue with the website not allowing you to get confirmation of being an essential service because you don't have a registration number, then you do need to contact the IOPSA and ask them how you can overcome that issue. But as far as I'm aware, if you are rendering an essential service, you need to be able to get confirmation from the IOPSA and perform your service.
How do I pay material costs in a 30B day account while I don't receive any income now?
Yeah, 100%. As I said previously, you obviously can't pay if it's impossible for you to pay. If you don't have the means available, you can't just be forced to pay. And as I said, negotiation is your tool during this lockdown period. You need to engage with all the stakeholders in your business, including your suppliers, and you need to come to arrangements with them and say, listen, I'm not going to be able to pay it. If you can't pay at all, then you need to, just say, listen, during the lockdown, I'm not going to be able to pay at all. Can we come to some kind of arrangement so that I can pay it off after the lockdown, because we're not getting income at this stage. If you can pay some of it, whatever arrangement you can come to that suits your business with your suppliers, you can come to.
Is it worth contacting vehicle insurance companies for relief, or are there any in place?
Okay, that's also a very good question. So the majority, okay, I can't say the majority, but a lot of insurers are automatically reducing premiums every month. I know personally speaking, mine was reduced. So they're offering some relief because obviously people aren't using their cars as much. You can contact your insurer and ask them if they have any lockdown measures and mechanisms in place to assist people with their expenses. Some insurers have even suggested that for the period of the lockdown, some of them are offering the ability of a client to reduce their cover from comprehensive to third party for the duration of the lockdown to reduce their premium quite significantly without affecting their cover, so that at the end of the lockdown they can go back to comprehensive without having to like reapply or change their entire policy. So there are mechanisms available with your insurers, and you should definitely contact them and find out what you can do to reduce your monthly expenses and commitments.
If an employee already take his annual leave before the lockdown and refuse to work during the lockdown, does the no work, no pay apply?
Yes. If he doesn't want to work, if there's work available specifically as well, and he's taken his leave and says, I'm not going to be working during lockdown, then that's no work, no pay.
Can we apply to TERS if some of the staff refuse to come to work? It would not be fair that the others use their leave and others worked and others then get paid out from TERS.
Yeah, that's a very good question. It's quite a difficult one to answer, actually. So, yeah, obviously, it's all about this. It's got to be fair. If there's work available and the staff are refusing to come, I don't believe that they would then qualify, but obviously you'd have to take that up with the actual scheme and ask them what the situation is, where the work is available, but the staff members refusing to come to work. As far as I'm aware, if you are refusing to come to work despite work being available, and you are not sick with the coronavirus or whatever the case may be, if you are not sick but are still refusing to come for whatever reason, then it's a no work, no pay situation. So it's best to contact the fund and ask them what the situation is when some staff are working and some are not.
How much do we have to pay our employees during the lockdown after they have received all their leave pay, etc.? Is it 75% or what other formula as basic leave pay?
Okay, as I said, you have no obligations to pay your employees if they don't have leave days or they choose not to take the annual leave days. Your obligations are to your staff members for when they are working, as well as paying them for whatever annual leave they have that they want to use. After that, you are not under any obligation to pay them. That being said, if you are not paying them, you must make that application on behalf of your employees to the relief fund to ensure that they can at least have some protection during the lockdown.
Are essential workers or companies allowed to ask for danger or hazard pay, as in the case of plumbers having constant contact with public?
Look, I mean, your rates for your services are always up to you to determine. If there are reasons that you want to charge a little bit more money, it's up to you, but you wouldn't then need to disclose to your clients that you are charging a little bit extra because it's because of the situation that you're in. That being said, you don't want to take advantage of the situation. A lot of businesses have been taken to task for increasing the price of certain goods that are considered essential, like hand sanitizer. They've been embasted and they are getting taken to the consumer tribunal for that kind of behavior. So you do want to be careful charging anything that you would call a danger pay. When there's an emergency, you're allowed to charge an emergency rate for something where less than 24 hours notice, you have to come out and fix something right away because there's a huge issue. So you're allowed to do something like that. So to increase your pay, it's up to you to dictate your rates, but I would suggest that you don't try and take advantage of a bad situation.
Are they an help for companies owned by foreigners?
Is there help for foreign-owned companies? Is that the
Yes, that's the question.
Okay, so the fund is obviously there to protect employees. If the business provides work to anybody really, provided all the qualifying criteria are met, there should be no reason why a business owned by a foreign national is not covered by relief measures. They also contribute to the economy and they also provide jobs. But again, you need to take this up with the fund directly. So obviously, I will provide the details that I have in my possession with regards to the relief scheme. And then those questions that are a little bit more niche, like this one, is best to ask the fund directly, because I don't know what the exact criteria are and what their disqualifying criteria might be.
So if you are a PRB member and have public health liability insurance, you can ask them to put it on hold until you resume work. I think that's more of a tip than question.
Yeah, doesn't sound like a question.
All right, the next one. What about medical aid relief?
Okay, this is a difficult one because your medical aid is still fully functional. Where you could reduce your insurance cover potentially if your insurer allows you to do so without affecting your policy in the future. That's different because you're not driving your car as much, but you are still 100% entitled to the medical cover that you're being given, and you're allowed to access medical services during the lockdown. So you can discuss the matter with your medical aid scheme, but it's also probably a time, and I'm speaking purely out of what I would expect is that the medical aids probably won't allow you any sort of leeway, because the chances of getting sick now with the coronavirus are fairly high, I would say. So they don't necessarily want to encourage people to reduce their cover for whatever reason during this type of outbreak. But again, discuss it with your specific cover provider, and perhaps they do have options available.
I have done the application online with SMME for a debt relief fund. I am still waiting for a reply. Please advise me accordingly, sir.
Okay, so it seems like there's a few people with this issue. So, like I said, don't just immediately submit your documents again. First, email them, ask them if they've received everything in good order and what your expected wait time or turnaround time might be. If you don't get anything back from that, give them a call. If you are able to get access to their number, I will do what I can to see if I can get their number, and hopefully it's just an issue of slow turnaround and they will get to you as soon as they can.
Follow up, the SIPC registration portal asks for a company number and does not accept the sole proprietor number. If you have a contact number to get further assistance on this matter, could you please make it available? Neither my accountants nor PRB have been able to provide me with an answer.
Okay, I'll see if I can get some contact details for them. That seems like an oversight on the part of the SIPC in terms of not accepting the sole proprietor number. It sounds like it might be a bit of a construction error with the website, perhaps. I'm not fully certain, and I can't really tell you what the SIPC's policies are with regards to registering people as essential services. So I think it's best if you contact them. I'll try and get a contact number for you, and hopefully it's working during the lockdown period.
What will happen if you can't pay rates and tax because tenants don't pay rent? Will they cut water and electricity if you can't pay?
Yeah, it's a good question. It's difficult to assess the government's stance. So generally, based on the government's approach so far, it's highly likely that there will be some kind of negotiation available for property holders to be able to pay off their rates and taxes at a different rate than normal. I'm not certain if this is going to be implemented, however, but generally speaking, it takes them quite a long time to shut off utilities for non-payment. It depends on the circumstances. So I would say that it's in your best interest to contact the department that you pay your rates and taxes to, find from them what their policies are going to be during the lockdown. They probably have their own policies in place. So yeah, I would definitely advise you to contact them and find out.
Do you know if there is any chance of early accessing your RA for funding at this time?
I haven't heard anything of that variety being made available. You can obviously it's going to be a similar answer for a lot of these queries where people are asking whether specific concessions will be made by specific service providers. The biggest piece of advice I can give you is contact each one of the service providers that you make use of to see if they have anything available during their lockdown period. I would assume that they won't be making that kind of funding available, but you never really know until you ask each of your service providers.
If you submit all your forms to UIF, will there be another form before they pay out that needs to be signed by every employer?
I don't think there's a further form to fill out once you've submitted all your documents. I believe once you've submitted the documents that they ask for in the beginning, I think that's everything. But obviously, I'm not 100% sure of that.
Okay. You mentioned that we are not under any obligation to pay employees if they are not taking or refuse to take leave, but that there may be labor laws implications if you do not pay them further down the line. So in essence, we must pay them no matter what, if the funds are there, whether they take leave or not. Am I correct? We want to pay our employees, but are concerned about the precedents this sets down the line.
No, okay. So I don't want anyone to take it out of context that they must pay regardless. Okay, so it's not about simply whether or not you can pay. If the payment of staff is going to put pressure on your business, of course, you don't want to put undue hardship on your business, which might result in job losses. The government has asked those employers who are able to pay their staff to come to their aid and pay their staff. That's not to say that there's a legal obligation. It's a very difficult position at the moment because on the one hand, you've got the employees who want to be paid during this difficult time, and on the other hand, you have businesses that obviously don't want to pay for no value. So it is a difficult situation, and what I mean when I say is that there might be problems down the line is that this situation hasn't been tested before. So while it seems that there is the ability of an employer to say, I'm sorry, I'm not going to pay you during this time. You can take annual leave or unpaid leave, but it's going to be no work, no pay. It seems that that is allowed. We are not certain what the outcome of a challenge to that policy would be in the courts. And so we don't want you to just say, no, don't pay your staff at all, and then you incur liability. You just need to bear in mind that there is the potential that a claim might be brought. Whether or not it will be successful remains to be seen, obviously. But as the matter stands, there doesn't seem to be any obligation on you to pay where the business is going to fall on hard times, or it's going to put pressure on the business and potentially cause the business to have to consider cutting time or reducing the staff complement in the business. At best, at the current moment, it seems that the only enforcement, if I can call it that, in place is that the government has simply asked businesses who can afford it to pay their staff. So those bigger businesses, such as banks, will still be paying their staff during this time. But obviously, the government is aware that not everybody can afford to just pay their staff for 3 months if there's an unforeseen length of time. that their staff won't be at work. So I'm not saying that you have an unconditional obligation to just pay if you can. I'm just saying that in the long run, if you're able to assist your employees, the government has asked you to do so, and this may benefit you in the long run with your employees. But each can be decided on its own basis, on what the business can afford, and on whether or not this is going to push the business into a very difficult time if they do just simply pay.
Right, Clinton, it seems that we are running out of time. If you want, I can email you the questions along with the email addresses of those who asked, and then you can get back to them.
Yeah, sure, you can do so. And then will you just jot down those questions where they ask for the details, just so I can be sure of the details I'm providing? I think it's the SIPC and both of the relief funds that are available. If you can just send those questions to me as well so that I can reply.
All right, I will do that. And then, yeah, thank you very much, Clinton, for this session.
All right. Thanks a lot.
And